All right, so this mug that I was using today used to say West Coast is the best coast, but the West Coast has rubbed off over time. And we're just joking with the fires, all the things that are going on I would say West Coast is the best coast, but I don't know. It's pretty tough.
It's a little debatable.
We just got out of
moment.
we just got out of a major heat wave, and then there's meaningful fires going on. There's a lot of people who are evacuated currently. So yeah, it's a tough moment.
I don't know. Northern California might be doing just fine, but down here, man, you walk outside.
It's our year.
It is a little apocalyptic. We're literally surrounded by fires. The air quality is terrible.
Yeah, the sky was all orange yesterday because of the fire smoke and things like that.
And it was like 115, I think we saw for a couple
That might be a little excessive, but it was up there, yeah.
It was hot.
Yeah.
It was really hot.
Yep,
so.
it was a stay indoors, folks.
Yeah, that's right.
For sure.
Well, much in the midst of all the physical things that are going on, we are having a great topic today. I'm excited about this one. So we are talking about the question: why is everyone talking about CD rates? Right. Why is everybody chasing these banks? And there's a few reasons. We'll get into the goods and the bads, but man, with interest rates about to be cut by the Federal Reserve, we have had a lot of clients and a lot of people who aren't clients asking about, hey, where do I find the best CD rate? Where do I find the best investment without investing? Without going into stocks, without going into long-term planning. I just want this short-term stimulus. And
just give me the quick fix now.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's segue the fires to some of the ups and downs that we're already seeing in the market. And, in years past, we know that an election year is particularly more volatile. September is a very volatile month. So we saw some of those magnificent sevens start to turn down over the last couple of weeks. We anticipate by the time this recording is published, the Fed will have already come out with their federal funds cut. Should be September 18th. And the question is, how much are they going to soften?
And all the talking heads have opinions, right? So
sure.
At the end of the day, it's what Jerome Powell comes out and announces. That's going to be the key number.
Yeah.
Right.
And for a while in COVID days, we were kind of good news is bad news. You would have a great economic result, but the markets would just go the other way. I can see the same thing with this. Jerome Powell may come out with a very reasonable and measured discussion, and the markets could love it, right. And here we go. And also, they could just react and everything take a huge dive. And that's part of dealing in this environment of we're starting to see increased volatility. Things are moving more than they used to. And there's a fair amount of uncertainty about the future. A big one, like you said, being the election. So, it's kind of in the midst of all these uncertainties, there's a number of clients who say, hey, I just want to be safe. I just want to be stable for now. And then we'll worry about investing, the first of the year. And for a lot of those clients, we have a conversation about, we often talk about 3 buckets. And the first bucket is your checking account. It goes between, 0 to 30 grand, depending the day of the month. For most people, it just kind of moves up and down. That second bucket is your kind of your short-term or even your safe cash. For some people, it's $20,000-$30,000 of just emergency money.
Liquidity is key in that second bucket. It's when the roof falls in, when the car breaks down, when it's your lever.
That's right. Access. And we have a lot of clients or even other people who, when they get a little fearful, they want that second bucket to get bigger and bigger. They want to have a couple $100,000. They want to have $1 million in that bucket, if they could. And then that third bucket is the long-term, hey, this is well thought out, it's invested, it's managed. I'm not trying to look at it every day. I want it to be this long-term stock investment or bond investment. So we're going to hear in this middle bucket of what do you do with that money? If it's emergency money, like you said, Laura, liquid, it might just need to sit in a savings account. And savings accounts today, they're making, 0.1%, 0.5%.
Well, it depends what bank you go to, but they're still low.
They're not making much.
Let's not neglect that the conversation has to do with the season of life that you're in, right? We're going to have a different conversation with those who are, having babies, just starting to buy a new home versus those who hey, I'm going to retire in the next 6 months, where their income stream is going to change. So, right, it is customized based on your needs.
Yeah, and that for a number of clients we've talked about, said that just having one savings bucket, kind of having split into 2 in your mind to say one of them is actually, like you said, Laura, my liquidity. It's just what I need for the emergencies. I have a roof issue. I need to get new tires. What's just the emergency money that I want to have available? But then there's also some level of this buffer And like you said, Laura, someone who's looking into retiring, wow, I'm going to retire in 6 months. I want to build up some extra cash just because I know I'm going to have some uncertainty. And, they may let that get a little bigger. So there's part of that, I think, from my perspective, always has to stay liquid, always has to be available. But it might be a smaller amount than people are thinking. Like you need, $10,000 available if you have that for an emergency. But beyond that amount, if you want to keep a larger amount in your savings, often we start having this conversation about CDs or about short-term bonds or about things like that. So, I think that kind of sets us off of where we're headed of jumping in. But is CDs the best way to go? Like, is that where everyone needs to be?
Yeah. I mean, a certificate of deposit is a timed savings account, typically with a bank. You have Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation that protects your amount that you go in there, and they give you a set interest rate for a set period of time. I had a conversation with a client yesterday, and he has a large sum of money, and we put it into CDs last year. So it's coming up for renewal. He said, I asked for a year, and the rate, I think it was below 4. It was like 3.8 or 3.7. But he said, then I asked for 6 months. He said, it's over 5. And he said, why is that? And I said, well, it's the environment of interest rates right now. Banks don't want to be caught with long-term money at a higher interest rate when they think that interest rates will be falling, right? So CD management is really important. So anyway.
Right. There's this strategy that we call laddered CDs, and we do that for some of our clients that want to put their money into CDs. And so we can ladder, which means there's kind of a revolving expiration date for the CDs. And so it's interesting to look at the rates that are being offered for the 3-month CD versus the 6-month versus the 12-month. But we can ladder those CDs so the maturity date changes. And then as they become mature, we can talk about reinvestment, or at that point in time, maybe we want to do something different. So,
yeah. And when the interest rates were going up, those ladders are really useful, right? You go from one to the next,
Sure.
you're climbing a ladder. Whereas now, I think how the world has changed slightly is that everyone expects the Federal Reserve, come September, like you said, Laura, September 18th, which is probably before this episode airs, it's going to start coming down. And so when you have a downward ladder, most people don't want to just step down the ladder in interest rates. They want to either lock in something or find something that's going to serve them for long term. But banks know that too, right? Banks are really slow to say, we're going to lock you into this really high interest rate when they know interest rates are going to come down as well. So just as your example, Randy, the longer term sometimes has a lower interest rate than these short terms. So I think the other option that we talk about CDs, the negative, like you mentioned, Randy, is it's locked in. Right, you can still get your money out, but you lose some interest. You usually have to, each bank has their own terms and conditions. But if you were to do that, you're kind of committing that money to be non-usable for 6 months or 3 months or a year.
Again, if there is an absolute emergency, you can get to it. It's just that they're not going to give you the interest. They're going to discount that dramatically back. So it's not as though the money is out of use if you had an absolute emergency. But, we caution people, don't put more money in there than you can afford just to let sit there for a while.
Right. If we were looking at liquidity like a scale, it's not like it's held up in real property where you'd have to actually take it to market, sell the product. Like that's going to have like a longer window for you to access it. You can access these funds. They're not as liquid as cash, but they're going to have some maybe not even penalties, but they're going to have some drawbacks.
Yeah, some limitations. So then we start talking about what are the other options. People who want to keep some money in cash. We mentioned the first one being just a good old savings account. And those have been really, I think, frustrating for a lot of folks. That banks used to pay a reasonable amount on your savings, and then they stopped, and it came really, really low, and it's remained low. I mean, banks don't really want your savings account. They're not looking to pay you a lot for it, right?
I think they do want your money.
Yeah. Well, they're not paying us. They're not convincing us. And so a lot of savings accounts are still pretty pitiful in what the interest is they're paying.
As compared to a CD rate, right?
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, 0.1%. I haven't seen anybody get excited about 0.1%.
Right. We're not keeping up with inflation. Your savings account is, it's just.
It's nice that it's there, but it's slowing down. So the other options we often will talk about is we start looking at some treasuries. So not talking about like a 30-year treasury as long as, but real short-term treasuries. And one that comes up is just that, short-term treasury. So we use one that's called USFR. It's a wisdom tree fund of short-term treasuries. We also use BIL. It's called BIL. And it's these week-long to month-long treasury notes that you can invest in, and they pay a great rate. And then kind of like the laddered CD idea is that they roll over every week or every month. and they get new ones. And so right now, those have been paying 5.2, 5.3. We expect them to start coming down, but depending what the Fed does, they'll probably come down slowly. So we may not have another year or so where we can take funds, we can take money, put it in a short-term treasury fund and be getting 5% or so. And it's liquid. You can take it out, a couple of days later, not a big deal. And that's been really useful for our clients rather than having to lock into CDs. Or the other issue I find with CDs is people have to chase them, right? They'll be in one CD for a while. They love it. It's been great. And then it matures and their bank no longer offers that rate. And they're saying, I'm going to move it to this online bank in Tennessee because they're doing better. And then after that, they got to move it to Maine. That becomes a game. And when we manage funds, we get out of that game. We just use short-term treasuries.
Right. I mean, treasuries gives you first of all, security. You got federal insurance on every dollar in there.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about hitting that limit of $250,000. If somebody has $1 million and they're going to a bank with all $1 million, they've actually exceeded the insurance, the FDIC insurance on that money. So going to treasuries, you don't worry about that. You go in because that's what treasuries are, is U.S. government securities. So the FDIC is automatically taken care of. So it makes a really easy way to park money and get reasonable interest rates for today, right?
Yeah.
Right. And
great.
You already said the punchline. That was what I was going to bring up next. Like for those of our listeners who are extremely conservative when they look at investing and they're nervous about putting any money into stocks or bonds, et cetera, and they say, yeah, those CD rates, that sounds great. Can I just put all my money into it? There is a cautionary tale there because the FDIC insures up to $250,000 per account. There's some other, rules around that, but essentially that's kind of think of that as a cap in terms of your CD investment.
Yep.
Right.
And there's a lot of programs that banks are starting to roll out or investment houses do. Well, they will set up it's like a CD, but it's using multiple banks, multiple accounts. They kind of spread that out for you, but you have to know to look for that, right? That's a value to you. And anyone who's looking to put, $500,000 or $1 million into an account, that FDIC insurance is meaningful. I mean, we had a couple of banks, fail this last year, which has not happened for decades. And the other one I want to bring up when we think of this like kind of very safe money, not in the markets, but what do I do with this money? Is I share a Series I bonds. They call them I bonds sometimes. These, if people remember, investing in these back in the midst of the pandemic when inflation was really high, they were paying almost 9%. Right. Sometimes a little bit over 9%, which is a phenomenal return. And the I in the Series I bonds stands for inflation. They're inflation indexed bonds that issued by the federal government. There's some caveats of how you get into them. Institutional investors can't just buy a whole bunch of them. They're limited.
You're limited as to the amount that you can invest on an individual basis, right?
It's right. Limited per person, how much you can hold. But it is in a way that we had a lot of our clients this last year pick up some Series I bonds as part of their portfolio because it's a great level of income or level of return. 9% was phenomenal for zero risk. Those have now come down. I think last I checked, they're paying about 4.2%. But it's good. It's a good long-term play to say if inflation comes back, they will go right back up. So it's not money you want to be in and out, but to let it sit there and know, okay, when I need this money 20 years from now, whatever inflation does, these bonds generally going to be keeping pace with that.
Right. So again, I think we have to talk with each client and meet their expectations. What clients expect from us is to do some kind of forecasting, like we talked about laddered CDs and such. So right now, you expect to have laddered CDs that incrementally, the longer the term the CD, you're getting higher interest rate. We're in an environment right now, you mentioned it, Jeremiah, that interest rates most likely have peaked, and now they're going to start heading back down. So laddered CDs may not be the best outcome, and so we have to shorten our length of CDs or what it is. But I think we're going to go into a lower interest rate market environment.
Yep.
And how does that play against what we call safe assets and people that are looking to try and get a better interest rate on that money?
Right. And no doubt we're going to see continued market volatility. So We've got the election on the horizon and we've got this softening of interest rates, and the market is going to respond to that. And so we encourage a lot of our clients, you come up with a strategy. Like, let's go back to the investment philosophy. You come up with a strategy, a target rate of return for the portfolio, and then you set it and you set the course. And you keep an eye and we rebalance. And, that's the job, the service that we provide to our clients is so they don't have to be checking their account every single day, right? Because that's certainly going to give you a little bit more anxiety than what's necessary. So for those who are quick to pull the trigger, they're loss averse, they want to grab all the funds out, we would encourage them to stay in there. Like the market will correct itself over time.
Yep. If you got good assets will perform over time.
Yeah. Well, and a key piece too, I think, for people who have been playing the CD game, over the last 2 or 3 years, they've been in CDs, they've rolled them over, they're getting their 5% or 5.2%, and they've been very happy with it, and they've been managing their money. It's kind of we've had these conversations internally, like there's a shift in the winds, right? Things are going to be a little different going forward. Right. And I imagine there's maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months where managing through CDs is still going to work. People are still going to be able to get 4%, high fours, mid fours, low fours, maybe 3%. But there's a day on the horizon where CDs are just going to keep going down and down. And I think people who are out there managing their own CDs are going to start getting a little frustrated to say, I used to be able to get 5%. I was almost getting 6% that one time. Wow, wasn't that great? But as interest rates come down, you can keep chasing for a while, but there's going to come a moment where that is no longer going to be a great performing asset. And it'll be time to start thinking about, well, what are the other assets that I'm willing to invest in? Right. And a big part of our job, and Laura and Randy, we do this on a regular basis, is really educating clients to empower them, to make sure they are comfortable with whatever investment, maybe we think is reasonable for them, but to help them understand it. I have a number of clients who, when they're new to us, they'll come in and say, stocks just seem scary, or stocks seem risky, or couldn't I lose everything? And those are some key questions that we want to address and kind of walk through and say, well, this is what we're actually proposing. This is the type of stocks that we would be looking at. And here's some potential outcomes. And as they become, educated in that, as they feel confident in that, often the fear goes away. And then it's now an objective choice to say, what's the best for my future? Continue to keep it in CDs, to move it to this type of portfolio, even these alternative assets. Those are great conversations to have. And so I think anyone who's listening, who's been using CDs and kind of chasing rates around, keep going. If that's what you like, keep going. But on the horizon, it's probably a game you're not going to enjoy because the rates are going to come down. So it's great to have the next season of your life planned out.
So this is really, I'm going to interject this right here. And this is a word of caution, because this is the time that the hucksters come out. So when interest rates are at their high on safe assets, and all of a sudden interest rates go back down, and somebody says, well, I can't live on 3% interest. And they get solicited by somebody or some organization that's going to offer them an unusually higher rate of return. And behind that language, behind that rate, they'll always say it's safe and secure, and these are funds that we manage. And this I've seen in my 40 plus years in this business. I've seen this again and again and again, how people get, it's a scheme, and it's a Ponzi scheme that is set up to take your money. And we always say this, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Yeah. So therefore, I'm putting this kind of word of caution out. Anybody who's listening to or watching this podcast right now, if you get an offer for unusually high interest and the word guarantee comes in there, or safe, or very secure, however they phrase it, it is most likely a scheme to take your money. You have to be very, very cautious about that.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Because they're going to prey on the vulnerable, and they're going to prey at a time when you're feeling the most vulnerable, right? Or scared of the most loss. So, well, let's answer the question just simply for our listeners, which is, if they are interested in CD rates, how do they find the best CD rates? So, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, the first one I always tell them is check your local bank. It may not be the best, but it's likely the easiest. So it's usually good to get a quote there. I'll throw that one in there. Laura, I think you might have had one as well.
Well, a couple of websites that I looked up, there's one called Money Rates. Forbes offers an ongoing list of CD rates among different banks and lenders, and Lending Tree as well as another one. Dad, you had one.
Yeah, Wall Street Journal, of course, comes out and publishes, but they have a QR. They have a search. They offer the best rates in the country. For these are people who feel comfortable, investing in a bank that's in New Hampshire, let's say, for example, will give you slightly higher rates, savings rates, CD rates, all of those kinds of things. And again, if it's in a FDIC bank, I don't care where the bank is located if I'm buying a bank. And there's limitations and such, but they have a very extensive and exhaustive list of current rates that come out on a regular basis. Another one, I think, did you mention bankrate.com?
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
said
bank
money
rates.
rates, but bank
Yeah.
rates.
Yeah.
Bankrate.com. So there's a lot of resources out there to help you find good
Help you
rates.
search.
We use those ourselves.
Mhm.
And of course, through our affiliate with Charles Schwab, we have access to a lot of the higher earning CDs and savings accounts. We can place that money into those
Yeah.
clients' accounts.
Yeah, and I think that the way the world has changed a little bit from say 20 years ago is these online banks that are people are pretty comfortable with. There was years ago where first you had to have your local bank that you're kind of limited to that market,
Right.
and then as the internet opened up and people started using national banks and all around the country, but there's still fraud and schemes and people didn't trust an online bank.
Right.
I think we're getting to a point now where a lot of those have been vetted. So there's a lot of banks that exist. I mean, you still have to, of course, do your due diligence and make sure it's legitimate. And like Randy said, wow, a grain of salt. If they're offering 2 or 3 points more than anybody else, you got to be careful. But the idea being that now to put money in a bank all across the country and have access to those banks is not odd. And I think it's a beautiful aspect that someone here in, say, Southern California could use a bank in New Hampshire or Maine or Texas or Alaska even, and utilize that as the best interest rate. So people who are shopping interest rates, you can go to some of these websites and you could find where it has a good interest rate, but you can also have access to these banks all across the country.
Right.
Yep.
Right. You just got to do the due diligence, pay attention to those expiration dates and make sure you know what's going on when those CDs expire. So
That's right.
I think that about wraps up our time on CD rates, how to find the best CD rates. We also talked about some complementary investment tools like treasuries and Series I bonds as well. But if you, one of our listeners, has any questions about how to keep your money safe, how to invest, interest rates, how that impacts CD rates and other things, give us a call. We're your team. We'd be happy to help you.
Until next week, folks, may you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for listening.
We have a few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review. Even if it's not 5 stars, we welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online. Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit tricordadvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@tricordadvisors.com or simply click on the link in the show notes.
This show was produced by Graham Gardner at Model FA. Find out more about how to create a podcast for your financial planning business by visiting modelfa.com. We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Tricord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.